when you have great coaches, then after you have great coaches, you get great players. You have a great organization, and you tell them one thing: just win, baby.
Are you looking for a podcast that brings you all the latest news and analysis on the silver and black?
Carr from under center, looks downfield, fires deep, complete. Waller's got it.
How about interviews with A-list guests?
Just Pod, baby. Congrats on 100 episodes. I'm happy for you guys. Keep doing your thing, and thanks for having me, man. It was a blast.
Look no further. You are listening to Just Pod, baby, a Las Vegas Raiders podcast, part of the Vegas Sports Today podcast network.
Henry runs! The speed! Touchdown! Carr with another bomb!
And now your host, Evan Groat.
And let's go, Raider Nation. And welcome back to a new episode of Just Pod, baby. I'm your host, Evan Groat. Happy to be here with you again this week. And we have some actual on-the-field football news to discuss this week. Phase 3 of the OTAs began across the league, and it was good to see some footage of football activities going on in the offseason, unlike a year ago at this time when our country was locked down, sports put on pause. Now, Just Pod Baby is part of the Vegas Sports Today podcast network. The site is up and running. Check it out for not only your Las Vegas Raiders news, but all things Vegas sports, if that's what you're into. Also, some news that I want to share with you guys in regards to the podcast. I've decided to launch a brand new website dedicated solely to the podcast, where you can find all of the latest episodes housed in one location for you. I also want to encourage you to check out the blog page of the website. I'm going to be posting just some quick little stories or just some of my quick thoughts from time to time, and you can leave comments on all of those different posts that I make. And, you know, I want to create kind of a dialogue with some of the listeners out there. And another feature that I really want to point out to you that I would love to see the listeners get involved with is the contact page. You can go to the contact page and you can reach out to me by shooting me a message with any of your thoughts related to the show, guests that you'd like to hear from, questions that you want answered on upcoming episodes, any kind of topic or player that you want discussed, or if you just want to vent after a bad loss or anything else. Don't hesitate to reach out. I'll respond and we can chat through the contact page. And this is really where I want the listeners to get involved with the show. So send me some of your stuff and I'll discuss it on air. And of course, the website can be found at www.justpodbaby.com. So I'm real excited about that. I encourage you to go check it out and just let me know what you think about the site. There's going to be some changes happening along the site from I'm just getting it underway. So there'll be some little tweaks that I make here and there, but let me know what you think of the site, and I hope you really enjoy it. Later in the show, we will be joined by our guest this week, and that is Sam Gordon, who covers all things Las Vegas sports, including the Raiders, for the Review Journal. So we're going to get him on. We're going to chat with him and just get some of his insight into the Raiders. But before we get into that interview, I wanted to get a couple other topics out of the way here first at the top. As I said, this week the Raiders did kick off OTAs, veterans and rookies took the field together, and really this is the closest thing we've had in a while to real football action. So it's good to see that. It's good to get a little fix that we've been yearning for at this point in the season. We get a chance to see some of those rookies or new free agents out there in the silver and black with some of the photos that are being tweeted out on social media and by some of the beat writers. And we're getting some stories now from some of the beat writers on what they're seeing out there. And also we did hear from some of the players this week who met with the media, and I'm going to be dissecting some of that audio in a few moments. But just some quick info on OTAs. I saw the number 83 of the 89 players on the roster were in attendance, and that is great to see. For what it's worth, the 6 players who were not present on Wednesday's practice, at least, were that was open to media, was Josh Jacobs, Yannick Ngakoue, Quentin Jefferson, Isaiah Johnson, Derek Carrier, and Divine Diablo. Now, I'm not really overly concerned with any of these guys out there. You would love to see Isaiah Johnson, who's a young cornerback on this team, getting out there, getting some work in with new defensive coordinator Gus Bradley and trying to learn that system. But I'm not overly concerned about him. And keep in mind, we don't know what's going on in these guys' personal lives, so I don't want to speculate anything about why they're not out there. Diablo is another guy you might want to see out there because he is a rookie, but he's not currently under contract yet. And I know that I did see that there's 2 other rookies who have not signed their rookie deals yet as well, but they're out there practicing. But, sometimes these rookie deals take a little time. They used to take a lot longer than they do now, but since they've changed the policy with rookie contracts to that slotted salary system based on where they were selected in the draft, they usually don't linger on too much. But it's still early, and I expect him. He'd be good to go. It's still early. He'll be good to go. But I'm happy to see such a large turnout. We were all a little bit disappointed just a couple of weeks ago. Don't forget, the Raiders were one of many teams across the league who released a statement saying that they would not participate in off-season training, right? They were going to be one of the teams who boycotted OTAs, but we learned a day or so after they released that initial statement that they met as a team and decided that they would, in fact, participate in OTAs, which I think was a very wise decision. And let's be honest, why the heck wouldn't they, right? I understand that, what the players union and J.C. Treader was trying to accomplish. They were trying to get their union to stand united against the 17-game schedule. And don't be fooled. They talked about player safety and COVID as the reason why behind that boycott. This had everything to do with the schedule going to 17 games. So make sure you understand that. But the thing I never quite understood is that, there's so many players in the union and they're all at different points in their career. And I felt like it was almost punishing the younger players in the league who need to be out there, who need to be getting that time in camp. I mean, you got a guy like a Richie Incognito for the Raiders who's going into year 15. He's made plenty of money in his career. But then on the flip side, you've got young guys like a Keyshawn Nixon, Tanner Muse, Amik Robertson. These are young players still trying to find their way in the league, and they need all the time on task as possible. So, it never really sounded fair to me that a lot of these younger players would really want to agree to that. I felt like they were kind of pressured into doing what maybe some of the veterans in the league were kind of maybe telling them to do. But anyhow, it's all water under the bridge now. Players are out there getting work in. And, I'm so glad because I did not want to hear again this season, like we heard many times last season, how much of a factor not having the offseason, a normal offseason in 2020 led to some of the struggles that the younger players on the team had. So that will not be the case here in 2021. Now, as I mentioned, I do want to get into some of the audio from this week's press conferences with a couple of the players. I want to start with Richie Incognito. He was one of those players who spoke to the media on Wednesday. Here's what he had to say about the attendance at OTAs.
I think it's a competitive advantage for us to be here working right now. We're a young team. We're learning a new defense. Offense, we're trying to sharpen our tools to be more productive, put up more points, put more pressure on teams. And it's just great. It's great for team building, great to be around the guys. Coach Gruden's taking good care of us as far as walkthroughs and keeping things down tempo. But it was important for us. The offseason kind of started off with the NFLPA and their agenda. And, we released a statement, but a couple days later we came together and we were like, listen, other teams are working. We are at a competitive disadvantage if we're not working. Let's get our asses back there and get to work.
As a fan, you got to love hearing that from a vet like Incognito. And not only is a vet who's been around a while, but he's a guy who's coming off a pretty serious injury that cost him most of the year last year. But he understands, he's been around long enough, how important it is for a young team to put in the time, build the camaraderie, and you can just hear the leadership qualities in those comments. And his leadership is going to be needed, especially along that offensive line, that young offensive line this year. And if you listen to one of the other players who spoke, which was Cleland Farrell, if you listen to any of his press conference, he gushed about Incognito and his leadership. In fact, Farrell said that every season since he's been on the team, he is voted for Incognito as one of the team captains. And I've got to admit, I was wrong about Incognito. Not to say that I was against him being signed when they did that a few years ago. I was against Antonio Brown, but I just thought the baggage that Incognito was bringing into that locker room, I didn't know if that was needed at that point in time. But the organization, they came out and said that they were going to have a plan for him, a support group, and I think they've done an excellent job in managing him and surrounding him with that support system. And all the credit in the world to Richie. He's been a good soldier, and he's been a really positive influence on the guys around him in that locker room. Now, the second piece of audio that I want to play for you is from third-year safety Jonathan Abram. Look, we all know it's a big year for Abram. He lost the rookie season with the labrum tear. He came back in 2020, didn't have a great year, was a little reckless at times, had some miscommunications, I think, in coverage. Honestly, he looked a lot like a rookie out there. It was really his rookie season. He's dealt with a lot of different injuries. I believe he even had COVID last year or was on the COVID list at one point. He's only played in 14 games in 2 seasons. But despite all of that, the struggles that he's had, he has still shown some flashes of playmaking ability, particularly in the run game. And say what you want about him, but you got to love his attitude. He's got a great mindset, a great attitude, and I love the intensity that he plays the game with. They just need to get him to play a little bit smarter with less mental errors and almost play more within himself. I remember saying this at times last year. It's not always about making the big home run play. Sometimes, hitting singles and hitting doubles is just as good. He's always looking for that home run ball, and I think that sometimes gets him in trouble. But getting back to the audio, it sounds like his role this year will be slightly different from a year ago, and I'm very, very happy about that. Here's what he had to say.
I mean, things are going pretty good. Pretty much going down to pretty much what they call the box safety, the strong safety. It's been pretty, it's interesting, going from what we went to last year, playing a lot of split safety, playing high. So this is kind of, I feel like it's going to be more suitable to, my talents and my strengths. So I look forward to this year, and just getting ready to come back, for each day, tomorrow, OTAs, finishing up strong with minicamp, and then coming back for training camp, just trying to get everything down pat.
Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I heard that, I started doing backflips because to me, this is how he should be used. Close to the line of scrimmage, in the box. This is what he does best. See the ball carrier, hit the ball carrier. Make his job easier right now. Allow him to focus on one thing right now, and that's him playing physical, in-run support, and that's what he does best. That is his game. So get him close to the line. I love it. And as he continues to develop, then ask him to do a little bit more in coverage. But right now, I like what I'm hearing from him, and I like that the plan that Gus Bradley has for John Abram. One last takeaway from Abram's comments to the media is he commented on Casey Hayward and his effect on the young secondary, which cannot be understated. Abram said that Hayward knows the system very well, he's a great communicator, talks all the time, every play. He's been very, very helpful, he says, to the other young players on the team who are trying to learn the system. So it's just a win-win. For the secondary. They not only get a good player in Casey Hayward who should be able to come in right away and contribute on the field, but also they get a guy who can serve these young players as a mentor and another coach out there on the field, and they can lean on him, ask him questions, and just look up to him for anything they need. So I'm really happy about that signing as well. And, for me, the secondary, when I look at this team right now as a whole, the secondary is the group that I'm keeping an eye on throughout the offseason as we get into mini camp and into training camp. They've got a lot of pressure on this group right now to bounce back after a bad season in 2020. There's no more excuses. They are young. I know this, but there's plenty of other young players in the league who have had success early on in their careers. I don't want to hear any more about not having OTAs or mini camps or preseason games being canceled or not having a normal offseason. That is over. That is all over. Okay, that is a thing of the past. The front office has invested way too much in the back end of this defense, whether it was free agency or draft picks, Trayvon Mullen, Damon Arnett, Abram. This year it was Moehrig. I could go on and on with the draft picks in the secondary in the last 2 to 3 years, and early draft picks at that. We're not talking about 6th round draft picks. We're talking about 1st and 2nd, 3rd round draft picks in the secondary. It's time to get it together. Gus Bradley's system is supposed to be easier. It's supposed to be less thinking. And, he wants his guys just to go out there and play fast. He brings over a very accomplished defensive backs coach in Ron Miles, who is known as one of the better DB coaches in the league. So now is the time for this group. And if it's not the time, if they should struggle again this year, then it's going to be time to maybe go back to the drawing board for this secondary. But let's hope that is not the case, and we just see some signs of life and progress from the young DBs this season. All right, guys, time for me to get to a quick break. And when I return, we're going to discuss, I have a list for you, a list of three people who I believe have the most to prove in 2021, as well as my interview with our guest this week, Sam Gordon. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Just Pod, baby.
Run down the field on them.
Your home for all things Las Vegas Raiders football.
Yeah, Raiders!
News, views, and guests.
Just win, baby.
There's only one nation, and they listen here.
Once a Raider, always a Raider.
All right, and we're back here on Just Pod, baby. We're going to open up segment 2 here with a subject that I was thinking a little bit about this week. Who has the most to prove this season on the Raiders? And I think there's a number of different places we could go with this discussion, depending on who you ask. I'm sure the answers you'd get would be varied. And I'm going to try to think of some maybe less common names here. I think there's some names out there that you may hear more often than not, but I'm going to look a little bit outside the box here with my list. The first one, I'm going to start right at the top here, and that's the head coach, Jon Gruden. He's entering year 4 right now, or this season, I should say, with an overall record of 19-29. And I know you've heard this before. You had to have heard this. Jack Del Rio, who was the coach the 3 years prior to Gruden getting here, had a 25-23 record in his 3 seasons. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that Jack Del Rio was the next Vince Lombardi, but he did have a better 3-year record with a playoff appearance than Gruden has had. Now, Del Rio, he made his bed. He had to sleep in it, right? When he decided to fire offensive coordinator Bill Musgrave after that prolific 2016 season with this offense, which was just on fire, hitting on all cylinders. And then he held on to Ken Norton Jr. a little bit longer than maybe he should have. But the facts are facts. He won more games in 3 years than Gruden. That being said, Gruden took over in 2017 and he gutted the roster, traded away future Hall of Famer Khalil Mack, traded away Cooper. And I think the jury is still out there on who exactly won those trades, the Bears or the Raiders or the Cowboys or the Raiders. I think, again, depending on who you ask, you're going to get a lot of mixed opinions. But Gruden has now had 3 years to restructure the roster with his guys. His guys. He handpicked his general manager and Mike Mayock to be his personnel guy. And there has been some questions with the draft picks in terms of where they were selected and the value that they've gotten for some of these guys. The 2019 class, in my opinion, we can now stamp a grade on that class at the end of this year. I always feel that 3 years is a fair evaluation period. And that's, we have, at that point, we've had a large enough sample size to kind of evaluate some of these guys. Not to say that some of them won't improve after year 3. You see players all the time maybe not hitting their peak until year 4, or you might have a guy who hasn't really done a whole lot with a team in 3 years, and then he gets a new change of scenery and he kind of flourishes. So, I'm not saying that stuff can't happen, but I just think 3 years is a good number as far as evaluation is concerned. You look at the defensive side of the ball, and the Raiders have been horrendous in Gruden's time back. He's now on a second defensive coordinator after he handpicked Gunther. That was his guy. And, he gets a lot of criticism as well for hanging on to Gunther maybe a little bit too long. He fired Brentson Buckner after the 2019 season. And then he brings in his old pal Rod Marinelli, right? And the defensive line actually plays worse. And he's been criticized a lot for that move as well, which I think is all fair based on what we saw last year. Again, I think these criticisms are fair. There must be some improvements this year on defense. There absolutely has to be. It's now Gus Bradley's job to get things fixed up over on that side of the ball. Offensively, though, the team, if you're going to throw support in Gruden's way or in his defense, you're going to point to the offensive improvements that were made. Derek Carr's playing very well, putting up solid, consistent numbers under Gruden. You can't ignore the fact that Gruden was responsible for plucking Darren Waller off the Ravens practice squad, and he's transformed him into, I'd say, a top 3 tight end in the league, maybe top 2. I think you can make that argument. And the offense was a top 10 offense in the NFL a year ago. But I think if you want to look at an area to be really critical of Gruden, I think it would be, and there's two areas. They would be the creativity department with his play calling. I think he could do more there. I really do. And I'm no X's and O's guy. I'm a fan, who knows a little bit about the game, but I've watched it long enough to see when a coordinator is super creative. When I look at a guy like Andy Reid, right? I mean, he's as creative as it gets. He knows how to utilize all his talents and the personnel and the groupings and all of that. I think especially in the red zone is where Gruden kind of shows his lack of creativity. And I think there was a bit of a failure to utilize Henry Ruggs last year as well. I talked about utilizing your personnel. I'm going to stand by that comment. We will see what he has in store for Ruggs in year 2. But I think the other big failure by Gruden so far in his return to the Raiders has been the way the team has finished in each of the last 2 seasons, 2019 and 2020. Say what you will about the injuries and COVID. We heard all about it from Gruden. But in both 2019 and 2020, the Raiders finished the final 7 games with a 2-5 record. Now, both of those seasons, they were right smack in the middle of the playoff hunt. And when your team has that kind of letdown, there's no excuse for it. That has to fall on the coach, especially last year when, in theory, I should say, the schedule lined up very favorably for them, and they still couldn't get it done. So to me, that's on the coach. That's his responsibility. Now, the second name that I want to add to my list here, and again, some of you might disagree with this choice, but I'm going to go Cleland Farrell. And, I go with Cleland Farrell in this spot, and this isn't me taking a shot at Farrell at all, but hear me out. He's entering year 3 now, and that 5th-year option, that decision is looming for him. And I can't sit here right now at this second and say it's a slam dunk that he's offered that extension. Can you? Can you sit here right now at this moment as you're listening and say, oh, no doubt about it, he's getting that 5th-year extension? I can't sit here and be fair and say that. Now, if you're measuring Farrell's impact solely on stats, then you're not going to be blown away. And I think that is the problem a lot of us have with him. Only 6.5 sacks in 2 seasons, 11 tackles for loss, 2 forced fumbles. He just doesn't have the impact plays that you would like to see from a number 4 overall pick. And I think that's another issue that many of the fans, myself included, that we have a hard time kind of moving on from is that, he was picked as the 4 overall pick. And I just can't shake that. No matter how I try to look at him, it's not his fault that he was drafted there. No matter what I do, I can't shake the fact that he was the number 4 overall pick, and he's just not producing like one. And when I think of a top 5 pick, I expect it to be a player who's going to come in and offer instant, immediate impact and playmaking ability. And that's just not what we have seen from him. That's just not what has happened with Farrell. He's a decent player. Do not get me wrong. He offers some really good qualities. He's versatile. He can line up on the edge, on rundowns. He can move him onto the inside on passing downs. And if you're into analytics, Pro Football Focus graded him out as their 16th overall edge player with a grade of 77 against the run in 2020. So it's not as if he's non-existent out there. He does show up, on tape. But I just think he needs to take it to the next level in year 3. I really do. We know Gus Bradley doesn't like to dial up a whole lot of pressure with his defense. So it is crucial that the front 4 is able to get after the quarterback. And Farrell, who will most likely, as I said, be bumped to the inside on passing situations, he's got to be a big part of that. They need a presence from the inside. So is it too much to ask 6 to 8 sacks from him? I mean, to go along with his ability to stop the run and to be a good run defender, I think that is what this defense needs from him in 2020 if they want to make a big step towards being a more respectable defense this year. And then the final name that I want to toss out there, and you can let me know what you think. You can DM me or contact me on the website. Andre James, what do you think about him? And talk about big shoes to fill, right? We all know how valuable Rodney Hudson was to the offensive line and the team. I mean, a team captain. We heard Gruden praise him over the years. Derek Carr always spoke extremely highly of Hudson and how he made all the calls for Carr and for the offensive line and just made Carr's life and his job a heck of a lot easier. But now you've got Andre James who steps in as the starter. They did bring in Nick Martin, a veteran, to compete, but keep in mind, they gave James that extension, so that tells you all you need to know about how they feel about him. He's going to be the starter. It is his job to lose, and pending a complete meltdown by him in training camp, he will be the starter. And obviously, the coaches feel extremely confident in what they've seen in James, and we just have to trust that right now. They've had him in the building since 2019. And they felt strong enough about his abilities to move on from a guy like Hudson. And not only did they move on from Hudson, but they extend James with the big contract. And if there's anyone that I believe in on that coaching staff, it's Tom Cable. He's done a great job with the offensive line. But at the same time, I do believe it's fair to at least have some mild concerns with a young player like James, who's only got 115 or so snaps under his belt at the position, at a position that's so vital to the offensive line as well. Let's face it, the center, when you look at the offensive line, that's the main cog and the whole thing, right? The center is the catalyst. And, I just think he's got a lot to prove. So that's why I threw him on my list. Not only does he have a lot to prove to himself, can he get the job done? I'm not saying he's got to be an all-pro, but can he get the job done? And can he prove his coach and his GM that they were correct in making that move? Don't forget, they're on the hook for this move as well. And anytime you move on from an all-pro caliber center who was still playing at a high level, and you take a chance on a young player who's inexperienced in this league, although they do have a belief that he, has the potential to be great, it's a risk. It is a risk. There's no doubt about it. But we're just going to have to wait and see how this all plays out with the offensive line and Andre James. So those are the 3 names that I have on my list. As I said, let me know what you guys think. You can tweet at me, DM me, or contact me over at the website, www.justpodbaby.com, with your thoughts, and you can let me know who you believe has the most to prove this year. Now it's time to go out to the phone lines and welcome in our guest this week. He covers all things Las Vegas sports, including the Raiders, for the Las Vegas Review-Journal. Joining us now is Sam Gordon. Sam, thanks for a few minutes of your time tonight, and welcome to Just Pod Baby.
I appreciate you guys having me. How's everything going?
Everything's good. Everything's good. I'm, excited. This week the Raiders began Phase 3 of OTAs, and initially we thought the Raiders were going to kind of go along with the stance that was recommended by J.C. Tretter and the Players Union not to participate in OTAs, but obviously the team had a change of heart. Richie Incognito spoke about that team meeting that they had where they came together and decided to get out there and work, and I'm really happy about that. It looks like 83 players of the 89 guys on the roster right now are out there in Henderson getting work in. And, based on the youth that's in the locker room, and when you also consider the number of times last year we heard from Coach Gruden over and over about not having an offseason and how that negatively affected this team, how important is it that they've had such a great turnout this week and that players are out on the field getting some work in?
Yeah, I think it's huge, right? I think it's huge for a number of reasons. One, you touched on it already. That rookie class, the 2020 rookie class, and there were certainly expectations of that class for those guys to be impact players. They didn't have a chance to really get a chance to develop and get their feet wet with OTAs and begin learning the playbooks and begin getting a feel for what an NFL practice or an NFL preparation is like until training camp. And all of a sudden you have a really quick training camp. There's all these protocols, and then it's boom, it's week one. There's no preseason. There's no anything. So I think for those guys, for those young guys from last year's group, they finally get a chance to get back up to speed. And that's not to say that there weren't rookies or young players that transcended that last year and were still highly productive. Of course there was. There were rookies around all over the NFL, but not everybody operates on the same timeline. And I think there's such a rush to judgment. We want to evaluate these draft classes day one, week one, year one. They're so quick to make decisions and evaluate guys and make judgments. And I think some guys take time. And I think for this Raider team, there are young, like you mentioned, a lot of young players that are working through their timeline and developing at their own speeds. And I think after 2, 3, 4 years, maybe you have more of a sample size on how good these players are going to be, and if you want them to be part of your future. But it gives that class a chance to grow. It gives, I think, most importantly, you heard guys talk about it on Wednesday when they spoke publicly to the media for the first time during the offseason. Football it's the ultimate team sport. It is. You sacrifice for one another. Everybody has to do their respective job, and I don't mean to get in a cliche mode, but how do you build that trust? It's by being around one another, by spending time together. And there was a lot of moving parts last year. Obviously, a lot of free agents that were brought in, a lot of young players, a lot of rookies, a lot of things of that nature. And they didn't have that time to kind of gel or to kind of bond. So now, like you said, with the turnout of 83 out of 89 guys, you get that chance to develop the camaraderie. You get on-field work in with a new defensive coordinator. If you're talking about the defensive side of the ball with Gus Bradley, you begin to develop and plant those seeds and develop those habits as a team that lead into training camp to get training camp off on the right foot. So I think for this particular team, for the Raiders that are in the situation they're in, we're like you said, a lot of young players that they counted on last year, that they're going to be counting on this year, and that they're going to be counting on moving forward, gives them an opportunity to develop and be around the veterans in a much freer way than they were able to be last year.
Yeah, I think you touched on some really good things there, and kind of getting back to, as I mentioned, J.C. Tretter and the Players Union. The problem that I had with that whole stance by them and the union is that it was never about COVID, or it was never about player safety, as they mentioned in that original statement. This had everything to do with the expanded 17-game schedule, and Tretter was trying to get his guys to kind of band together, be united, and kind of make a stand against the league and the idea of expanding to a 17-game schedule. And I just didn't think it was fair, especially to the young players around the league who, were not in position that J.C. Tretter was in, or some of the other veterans in the league where they're still looking to establish themselves in the league, looking for that next contract or their big first payday. And I'm glad that some of the other veterans around the league, Richie Incognito being one for the Raiders, got guys together and said, listen, we got to get in camp. We got to get working. And it's important that, as you mentioned, we're building that camaraderie, and it's just so important for a lot of these young guys. But I do want to kind of change gears here. I want to ask you about another big topic in the offseason for the Raiders. That's the offensive line. There was a major shakeup to that group. Gruden and his staff believes that they not only got a little cheaper along the offensive line, but he thinks they got a lot more athletic as well. I still think personally there's still some concerns along the offensive line for me. You got Andre James, who's played very limited snaps to this point in his career. They're going to start a rookie in Alex Leatherwood at right tackle, and I like the player, but that is, he's still going to be a rookie stepping into the NFL. That's always a big jump, even when you come from Alabama. Richie Incognito, he's 38 years old. He's coming off a serious Achilles injury. Denzel Good looks like he is going to be penciled in as a starter, a guy who's been more of a backup throughout his career, or a swing tackle, or a versatile, can play guard as well. But it just seems to me this thing could either work out really well and they could turn out to be a pretty solid group, or it could totally blow up in Gruden's face. What's some of your thoughts though on the offensive line?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. It's a little bit of a risk. We know how good Rodney Hudson has been throughout the last several years, one of the best centers in the NFL, and then what Gabe Jackson's meant to that unit as well. I think for all the Raiders' struggles, and I know the some of the analytics might not necessarily bear it out, but for the most part, the Raiders' offensive line has been pretty solid. That's been a strength of the team the last few years. They had to piece it together last year. You had Trent Brown in and out of the lineup. You had Incognito going down. You had the coronavirus situation where guys aren't practicing. It was really kind of a turnstile and a makeshift offensive line. For the most part, I thought it held up pretty good. Derek Carr, one of the least sacked quarterbacks, was able to do his thing back there. Hadn't had a career year. He wouldn't have been able to do that had it not been for solid offensive line play. And I think what this turnover suggests is that it reaffirms how much faith John Gruden has and Mike Mayock in the front office have in general in Tom Cable, and what he's able to do, how he's able to develop offensive linemen, what he's been doing, since he's been coaching, an offensive line coach in the NFL. We know how long that's been. So that's what I think they're hanging their hat on, is that Tom Cable is going to get this done. And I think there is a lot of upside with the kind of the youth movement. You look at Alex Leatherwood, was one of the best run blocking tackles in the league, or in the draft, coming out of Alabama. We know about his pedigree, Outland Trophy, All-American, national champion, and this Raider team wants to run the ball. So I think that skill set, at least in year one, as he continues to develop as a pass blocker, is going to bode well for him and for the team as a whole. Like you mentioned, they did get younger. They got a little bit more athletic. As far as it pertains to Andre James, they had him in the building the last couple of years, and clearly had a plan for his development, for him transitioning into becoming a starter in this league. And I don't think they would have signed him to that contract extension had they not liked what they've seen, had they not had Tom Cable not liked what he's seen. So it's going to be a new unit, and I don't think we're really going to know how it looks until or how it's going to do until we get a couple games into the regular season. I'm not even sure we're going to know week one, but I understand why they made the moves they did. They wanted to get a little younger. Like you said, they wanted to get cheaper, and they wanted to transition into this next era. And if Leatherwood pans out the way they think he's going to, I mean, they did take him in the first round ahead of offensive linemen that a lot of analysts had graded higher. But if he hits, and who knows, we're going to find out in the fall. You have your right tackle of the future, and you have Colton Miller locked up at the age of 25, going to be 26 this year. You have your left tackle, and you're set at your cornerstone positions the next 5 years at minimum, and then you do what you got to do to develop guards once Incognito moves on, and depending on what happens with Denzel Good. So it's a question mark, but again, it reaffirms to me the faith that they have in Tom Cable and his ability to develop an offensive line. Heck, he did it last year with guys in and out of the lineup, and with backups starting and starters gone and all that. So I think that's having him in the fold bodes well for the Raiders and how this unit is going to develop. But any type of skepticism is understandable, because this is a new group. It's a brand new group, and offensive line as a whole, outside of quarterback, I think is the most important position or unit in the NFL. It's about protecting your quarterback. You got to protect him, and this group is, in order for this team to have any kind of success, in 2021, regardless of what the defense does, they're going to have to keep Derek Carr upright. So we'll see. It is risky, but I think there's, like you said, a lot of upside there as well, and it's understandable why they wanted to go in this direction.
Our guest this week on Just Pod Baby is Sam Gordon of the Las Vegas Review-Journal. And you can follow Sam on Twitter at @BySamGordon. That's BY Sam Gordon. Sam, I was talking a little bit earlier on the show about players who I feel have the most to prove this season. And I think there's a number of directions that you could go in with this one. But when you look at the roster, is there a guy that kind of jumps out to you that you can pinpoint, or maybe a guy or two that you can pinpoint and say, this guy has got to show me something this year. He needs to be more productive, and, he needs to make a bigger impact in order for this team to make that jump and finally get through it and into the playoffs in 2021?
Yeah, I'll give you a guy on both sides of the ball. First, on offense, I think Henry Ruggs, right? I mean, there's no doubt that his speed, his 4.2 speed had an effect on the way teams defended the Raiders last year. And he had his moments where he was, where he directly impacted winning. The Chiefs game, the Jets game, his plays, his big plays, touchdowns, had a direct impact on the outcome, and his production was extremely, extremely valuable in determining the outcome of those games. But this is a guy that they invested a top 15 draft pick in. He has a full off season now. He knows what it's like. He has a full 16 games to look at, the tape, the film, or however many games he played. I know he missed a couple with injury, but what is he going to do? You draft a guy in the top 15. You don't expect him just to be a decoy or somebody that clears out defenders by going over the top so other guys can get free underneath. I think the expectation is that he develops into a premier pass catcher, one of the best players on your offense. So I would expect him to make a jump. And I think granted, given the draft capital the Raiders invested, I think he needs to make a jump. I mean, Nelson Aguilar was kind of that home run guy last year, and I know Ruggs helped him out with that, being on the field, again, taking the top off the defense or taking some attention. But now is a prime opportunity for him to step up and become a more productive player, become a complementary player to Darren Waller, because we know Darren Waller is going to be the number one option based on how unstoppable he is, or how hard he is to guard at 6'5" and 6'6" with his skill set. So I think Ruggs is in a big line, or in line for a big year too, and I think the Raiders, in order to unlock this offense, need him to be a little bit more productive in year two. And then defensively, Corey Littleton. And we know what Corey Littleton's done in the past, what he did with the Rams. He was a tackling machine. He could fly around in coverage, and he's a really, really productive player. And we just didn't see that from him last year. And I think, because there have been all these moves made in the secondary and all these moves made across the defensive line, we've kind of forgot about the linebacking core a little bit. But they're bringing back all three starters. And if Gus Bradley can unlock the Corey Littleton that played with the Rams, and if Corey Littleton bounces back, all of a sudden the second level of your defense gets better as well. I thought all things considered, we know it was a bad defensive unit last year, but as a whole, I thought the linebackers were the most consistent group, and that's despite Littleton's struggles. So if he becomes that player that can fly around in coverage and also make plays in the run and get back to where he was with the Rams, I think that helps your defense even more than you're expecting it to be helped this year. But definitely, given the year he had and the player we know the kind of play we know he's capable of, I think it's crucial that he bounces back in order for the Raiders defense in 2021 to reach their full potential. Yeah,
I think those are two names are very fair. And I think, when you're talking about Ruggs, I think one of the big things that was the issue for Ruggs, it wasn't necessarily his fault, in my opinion. Only 43 targets in 13 games. I thought Gruden could have done a little bit more to get the ball in his hands, allow him to make some plays. Although we did hear Mayock and Gruden talk about how they thought he could develop a little bit more as a route runner. He needs to do a little bit better job of getting off coverages and whatnot. But, I still think they could have gotten him a little bit more involved in the offense. And I think that kind of falls back a little bit more so on the play caller with Coach Gruden. And that kind of leads me to my next question that I want to discuss with you. What do you think about Gruden? He's actually someone who I also discussed, who I think has has a lot to prove. Not necessarily a player, but he has a lot to prove here as he enters year 4. He has the 19-29 record so far in 3 seasons. The defense, you mentioned, has been historically bad under Gruden. He brings in Gus Bradley. He's going to be tasked with trying to fix this defense. Offensively, though, they have shown some growth. If there's some positives to what Gruden has done here in his first 3 years is, Carr has played really well under Gruden, but I look at how this team has finished in each of the previous 2 seasons. There's no excuse to be in the hunt at 6-4 and then 6-3 this past season, to end the season the way they did back-to-back years. To me, there's no excuses there. So, I think when I look at this roster, the coaches that were brought in the offseason, the draft picks that were made, this team absolutely has to make a playoff push in 2021. And if not, then I think it's fair to start having that conversation of, was it a mistake to give John Gruden that massive 10-year contract? What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, if we do the blind resume thing and just look at the last 3 years and take the name and the contract away from it, like how many coaches would still be standing, after a tenure like that, and after, like you said, going out like that towards the end of the season. Now, given that John Gruden does have a pedigree, it does have a championship pedigree, does have that extension, he's obviously going to get a little longer look in terms of being the head coach of the Raiders. But I'm with you. I think it's time. It's time. This team was in prime position to make the playoffs last year, and the way the schedule was set up, it was actually the second half of their season, in theory, should have been a lot easier than the first, and it just wasn't. The team didn't peak like playoff teams typically do or often do towards the end of the year. They regressed. There were mistakes made situationally, late in games, execution, all these things that you can't have if you want to be a playoff team. So now it's year 4. There's a normal, for the most part, a normal off season. So that card is unavailable in terms of, we didn't have a full off season to get ready. You're having an off season, and like we touched on earlier, mostly all the players are there. Most of the important key players are there, and the ones that aren't there, remember, this is voluntary. This part is voluntary. So I'm sure they'll be there at the mandatory part in June and get ready for training camp. So the money's been invested in the defense. The offense has been built out. Like you said, you got to give him credit for the way the offense has developed. It has been better the last couple of years. It was very good this past year, and we know that's his forte. But as a whole, I think it's time. I think it's time to compete for a playoff berth, and it's a reasonable expectation, given where this team was last year, given the moves that they've made, that they finish 9-8, 10-7, 11-6. I don't know exactly what the record is gonna be to get in the playoffs. I think it's different every year, but the AFC last year was loaded, and the Raiders were right there. If they make a couple plays late in games, they're 10-6 instead of 8-8, and there is pressure on him, no question about it. So I think expecting them to compete for a playoff berth and even make the playoffs is a reasonable expectation for the fan base. It's not going to be easy. The schedule is extremely challenging, and we know we still have to see how this defense looks on the field. I think theoretically it's going to be a much improved unit, and it's hard to imagine it can be any worse than it was last year. And that's no disrespect, but that's just what it was. The numbers bear that out, and the eye test does as well. With Gus Bradley in the fold, with investing in a defensive line and a pass rush and going to get your free safety in the future, it should be a much better unit. And if the offense can sustain its level of play, I don't even think it necessarily needs to improve. If it can be around a top 10 level and you have an average defense, it should be a team that can compete for a playoff berth and possibly make the playoffs. And at this stage, Gruden's had the time to make this roster in his image, to put together the team he wants to. I think it's time, like you said, it's totally reasonable to have some expectations that this is a playoff team, or at least close to it. And 19-29 speaks for itself. The last 2 years, the late November, December stuff, that speaks for itself. I don't even really need to touch on that. So definitely a crucial season coming up for the head coach.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning the head coach prior to John Gruden In his previous 3 seasons, Jack Del Rio was 25-23 with a playoff appearance. So it's worth mentioning. But there you heard it from Sam Gordon of the Las Vegas Review-Journal. Thank you so much for all your insight this evening, Sam. I appreciate you giving us some of your time. Keep up all your great work, and thanks so much for joining us.
All right, no doubt, man. I appreciate you having me.
All right, nice job there by our guest this week, Sam Gordon. And I agree with him with his assessment on both Ruggs and Littleton as 2 players who have something to prove in 2021. Let's be honest, there's a bunch of guys on this roster right now that need to step it up this year if this team wants to get into the playoffs. And it also sounds like that he agrees with me with my take on John Gruden. So, be sure to support Sam with the Las Vegas Review-Journal, and you can follow him on Twitter at @BySamGordon. Okay, guys, that is going to be a wrap for this week's show. Thanks again to our guest, Sam Gordon. And I hope that everyone enjoys the long holiday weekend. Also, take a moment to remember and salute all of those who made the ultimate sacrifice for our freedoms on this Memorial Day. Until the next time, I am your host, Evan Groat. This is Just Pod Baby. And as always, just win, baby.